Steve, as Gabby had a question just before some of the technical issues, is it a good idea if we begin by asking Gabby to come on and share her question with all of us here today?
It is.
Hello?
Yes, hello. Hi, Gabby.
Oh, hi. I was actually writing in the chat box now, so thank you. Thank you very much, Neil. Now, Steve, I have so many questions that I just simply don't know where to start. But also I understand that I will not be able to ask all my questions, because I was actually writing in the chat box that I would love to hear what other attendees have to say about the silent way. Because let me start by saying that I feel really, really embarrassed to say that after so many years of teaching, and I'm a teacher trainer, I'm a CELTA trainer, I knew so little about the silent way that it's embarrassing. Okay, so let me start with this. Then the next point I want to make is that I absolutely fell in love with the silent way. Okay, so just to get a better idea of what it is, I started doing a little bit of a research before this webinar. So yesterday I spent a little bit of time trying to watch some demo lessons, read some stuff, and I actually went to Gatenio's book as well. So I was trying to get my head around what it actually is all about. And I felt that it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant, okay? And I feel that so many things like dogma, for example, or even task-based learning, I feel like all these methodologies are effectively based on the silent way, dogma in particular. And there was a time in my life when I was in love with dogma, and now I feel that dogma was just stealing ideas from the silent way, and the silent way is simply dogma, but a little bit more refined and more systematic. So it's a system. We would call it a system in philosophy, and this is how I feel about the silent way. So that's what I wanted to say first. Now I have many other questions, but I really don't want to hog this session. So I wonder what you can comment on what I just said, and then I'm going to shut up for a little bit. And
well, first of all, please don't be embarrassed. I think that doesn't work at all. One of the unfortunate, what can I call it? One of the unfortunates about silent way is that academics have, on the one hand, said, you know, they've been quite insulting about Gatenio, saying, well, Gatenio only ever referenced himself, and that is kind of true. He did only reference himself. If you look at his bibliographies, they're all about himself. But on the other hand, there isn't a single academic that I've come across that's done any serious research into silent way. And therefore, it's remained, I mean, you describe yourself as a teacher trainer, and as a teacher trainer, you will be bound to work with things that are known. You'll be bound to you know, to talk about the research and evidence and stuff like that. But the silent way doesn't work on that basis. And I struggle with this too, you know, as an academic in inverted commas when I worked in universities and so on, as a teacher trainer. But so that would be the first thing to say. Don't be embarrassed. There's absolutely nothing to be embarrassed about. What is fantastic is that silent way is still here. It's still around. And if you find that it's something which appeals to you, I mean, that's just brilliant. That's just brilliant.
Yeah, but I do feel that perhaps, I mean, obviously it needs more publicity, but then you see, the thing is that the information you find about the silent way is very, it's typically very brief, therefore very confusing, because the system is so deep and it's so complex that it's just very, it's sometimes when you just read, say, a 5-page description of what the silent way is all about, it's off-putting. I mean, this is how I felt about it. I felt like, right, okay, and what exactly is this all about? I'd like to see a lesson.
Yes.
And it's very difficult to find a decent lesson. So, yeah.
Can I just come in there for a second, because that is absolutely true. It is very difficult to find a decent lesson. And I'm on the edge of saying to people, don't look at some of the lessons on YouTube, because I've looked at them and I've ended up tearing out my hair. As you can see, I haven't got a lot left. And that's because I've been tearing it out, watching this stuff, which is supposed to be silent way, and it's absolutely not silent way. Absolutely not. There are some which probably are, but there's a lot which isn't. And can I just, before I hand back, your comment on Adrian Underhill's, I trained under Adrian Underhill, and he was the bloke. I'll tell you something else in a minute as well. He was the bloke who really introduced me and my fellow trainee teachers, young teachers, to the concepts of and principles of silent way without necessarily mentioning the word itself. Now, can I just say this as well? I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, but I asked Adrian if he would be the panelist, and he said no for this session, because he said, every time I try to explain silent way, people go away with their own thoughts, and I never manage to get my point across. I can never make it clear. And so I've become frustrated. He didn't say this, but I'm paraphrasing. He said, I've become frustrated with the whole process. So good luck to you, but I'm not going to do it. Thank you.
No pressure there then.
No pressure.
I absolutely echo everything that has been said. I like to think I am reasonably adept when it comes to methodology, but it struck me that both this session and Gabby's made reference to some of the articles that exist. That, I mean, I reached out immediately and had a look at Jack Richards' methods and approaches, and his chapter there about the silent way, which I think created more questions than it did provide answers, which in itself is actually no bad thing. But when you're trying to kind of get a grasp of something, and I think what Gabby is articulating, Gabby, agree or disagree with me, is that given that there's so much, and you've mentioned this yourself, Steve, apparently poor versions of the silent way on YouTube, one of the questions that I wrote, and then I wrote again as I listened to this another time, was, well, where can we go to see a series of good silent way lessons? Maybe there's an opportunity here for you to have some recorded and put on YouTube, I don't know. But A, where do we go to see it in action? And perhaps secondly, also, if someone wants to train in the silent way now, where do they go? Who can you suggest so that their understanding of the silent way is true, not just to the practice of the silent way, but also to the philosophy that I think underpins it and is such an important part of it, as you've explained?
Yeah. To the first question, I don't know. I don't know where you can go to watch, but you know, it's really interesting that people say, I must go and watch a lesson on silent way, but they never say that about the communicative approach.
Yeah.
Right? They never say that. Well, I've never heard anybody saying that about TEFL, for example. But so the answer is I don't know. I've got a couple of old videos of me doing stuff which is kind of related to silent way. To the second part, all I can say really is that I've been discussing with people for many years the idea of running a silent way training course, perhaps either a week or a very long weekend, somewhere nice where we all meet up, and perhaps, you know, a maximum of 20 people or something, and really get down to it. So that is also a possibility. But I'm not. How can I say this? I haven't been looking around for training courses, so I don't really know.
I suppose a question that follows on from that, therefore, is that, you know, Gabby, someone we hold in a very high esteem, you know in what high esteem I hold you. Silent way seems to speak to a lot of people. And perhaps counterintuitively, it also speaks to people who prize evidence-based teaching.
Yep.
I think we can see in the silent way something really convincing. So why do you think it is that, unlike TBL, unlike the communicative approach, that it isn't more widely spread through language classrooms?
It's a kind of catch-22, I think, to be honest. I think, you know, because it's not widely spread, it's not widely spread.
Yeah. Okay.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Do you think, I mean, many language schools around the world, here in the UK, we have the British Council, oversees a small number of private language schools, are linked into Cambridge exams, linked into equals as a number of, I think, you know, good institutions, but nevertheless, perhaps not entirely in harmony with some of the more holistic ideals of the silent way.
Yes.
Do you think that it takes a particular kind of institution, and perhaps also therefore a particular kind of teacher, to be able to make the silent way work? Or is it actually something that we should all be really, I don't know, idealistically, I'm not sure, but is it actually something that really would work in the mainstream had it had its opportunity to do so? Had it become
I think it's a really good question. I think it's actually quite a complicated answer. So I'll try and keep it short. I think, first of all, I mentioned the demand that this makes on teachers. And I do think that there are many teachers who simply couldn't do it, not because they're not used to that way of thinking. That you've got to really you've got to really change your whole mindset to become a successful silent way teacher. You've also got to be convinced in what you're doing. I think that's also really important, because the authority that you show, authority in the most benign sense, to students, it will give them the confidence that they need. So there's a whole kind of, there's a layer of problems which have to be tackled if you want to move from what we'll call classic or classical teaching. And by that, I mean a communicative approach, obviously. I'm not talking about grammar translation. So the shift from being a communicative approach teacher into being a silent way teacher is massive. It mustn't be underestimated. Now, whether institutions will allow that to happen depends on the people who are managing them. It's really as simple as that. I knew a chap who had his own school, and he was a silent way enthusiast, but he wasn't. His director of studies wouldn't allow him to run silent way during the year. He had to run his silent way courses over the Easter break. So yeah, so that's where we are.
There's a couple of questions that have come in. I think Gabby had one, a couple of other. Yeah, okay. So again, a couple more questions I'd like to follow up, but Gabby's asking if it's suitable for new teachers. Would it be right, thinking about your answer that you've just given, it's not really to do with the stage that a teacher is at her or his career, it's to do with their mindset? Yeah,
I mean, as a young teacher working under Adrian Underhill and all the other fabulous people at IH Hastings all those years ago, I was a young teacher, and I slotted into silent way perfectly because it agreed with me and I with it. So there's not. It doesn't matter whether you're an experienced teacher or a young teacher. If the thing agrees with you, if you can sense what Gattegno would have called the common sense of this way of working, then yeah, you know, go for it. Young teachers if you had a teacher who was only ever trained in silent way and began teaching and then had exposure to a communicative approach or somebody teaching in another way, I think they'd be shocked. I think they'd be genuinely shocked at what was going on in the classroom.
That's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because we tend to think about, or I say we, I tend to think about, and I think I'm not alone, that when we think about some of what we might rephrase in some cases disparagingly, as the alternative approaches of the 1970s, many of which you mentioned at the beginning of the actual session. It tends to be that kind of, well, we've got community language teaching, that's the default, and everything else is an interesting aside.
Yes.
So turning that absolutely on its head and saying, someone who has come through the silent way approach, walking into a CLT classroom, can you perhaps just tease out a little bit more for us, Steve, that sense of shock that they may have? I'm sensing that you may feel that it would be a negative
no, definitely.
Have. Can you tease that out a little bit more?
I can try. I mean, this is obviously something from my imagination, because I don't know anybody who's done this. But as a silent way teacher, I've observed many lessons in thousands in using communicative language teaching, or what people think is communicative language teaching. And I've often been, even with my experience, I've been shocked by what I've seen. So what would that silent way teacher first be shocked by? First of all, they'd be shocked by the fact that the syllabus is top down, largely, that they're working from a book and bound to follow. How many teachers have you heard say, well, I haven't got time to do this, or I haven't got time to do correction because I've got to get through a chapter a week, a unit a week? Good God, come on, let's get real now. This is not language teaching. This is producing sausages, and not very good ones either.
Grammar McNuggets as well. One of Thornbury's thoughts.
There you go.
I also, it seems to me that there would also be a kind of a shock at the reduction, or perhaps the lack of opportunity for those moments of having an awareness. And one description I saw, which I think has helped me to try to grasp what Gikatenya was saying in terms of having an awareness, it was really about a light bulb moment. And I was trying to kind of think about what would that look like, and very nicely, I think you provided me one when you were talking about the sort of the 2 for the price of 1, 3, 10 and 13. And I was thinking, well, hang on a minute, couldn't that also be 3, 10 and 30 rather than 13? Then I thought, well, actually, here's my light bulb moment going off. I'm actually spontaneously asking questions, and then by experimenting as I understand it with my fellow students, plus the teacher, I might say 13 and maybe do that to indicate 30, and then I would just simply get a no from the teacher.
Absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect. I mean, this is really what happened. I mean, I can sit here until I'm blue in the face and tell you about experiences I've had in a silent way classroom where I've taken on a group of students who've been working with somebody else, or rather not with somebody else, but with another system. And as soon as the rods appear on the table, they draw their chairs forward. And this is sort of, this is a focal point. This is a thing. And this has happened hundreds of times. And they suddenly get involved, where before they've been plowing their way through some bloody course book, Headway or something disgustingly expensive from somewhere in Oxford or Cambridge. And they find themselves freed by the notion that they can sit around the table and do things with little wooden or sometimes plastic blocks. And can I do, while I'm there, sorry, Neil, I just wanted to, I think it's Maria Josefa has asked, she says, I'm wondering if the silent way is suitable for young students. And I really wanted to address that because the answer is yes. Now, this is an area where teachers will say to me, yes, but you can't not praise 7-year-olds. 7-year-olds have to be praised, and they don't. 7-year-olds, I'm not going to go lower than 7 because I don't really think a second language classroom is a suitable place for somebody younger than 7. That's just my personal view. But kids of 7, 8, 9 can respond extremely well to silent way. They realize very, very quickly, perhaps even faster than adults, that they have a power, that they have within them the possibility to do something and feel fantastic about it, because I'm not going to tell you you're fantastic. And if I'm not going to tell you you're fantastic, who will? Well, it'll be you. So you see them literally having a go at something and then getting it right, for lack of a better expression, and metaphorically prodding each other to say, look at that, look at what I just did. Not literally prodding each other, although that has happened, but certainly metaphorically prodding each other to say, look what I just did, isn't that great? And the teacher, meanwhile, isn't responding in any judgmental way at all. Having said that, the classroom has to be what we think about, the effective filter. So people have got to feel comfortable, they've got to have some fun. So I will raise an eyebrow, I will wink, I will give students a smile, I might even do a thumbs up occasionally, but that's all. They won't get more than that.
I'm really interested in you picking up on Maria Josepha's question, because I had a different take on what I thought you were going to say based around this point about the awareness, because young learners, I mean, I agree, you know, under 7, no. But if you look at the young learner space of 7, 8, 9, 10, yeah, where the kind of the cognitive processing and some of the inductive processes that take place in an awareness moment perhaps are less well developed, some might argue don't even exist in learners of that age group. And therefore, how does the silent way work with young learners if it's the case, and it's a big if, and I ask the question, actually, am I wrong? If this awareness inductive learning is somehow less part of their the way in which they learn. Does that make sense at all?
Yes, it makes perfect sense. You're asking whether if it's less developed. I think that's what you're asking, yeah, isn't it? Because I mean, we all work at our own level, and one of the fantastic things about Silent Way is that Gattegno always said, "You work on the students, let the students work on the language." Now that initially, along with many things that Gattegno said, it might not make too much sense. I mean, I have to tell you that I have spent, or I did spend, years literally trying to work out what he really meant by some of the things he said, because you couldn't ask him for a clarification. You couldn't say, well, what does that mean? He'd say, it'll mean whatever you think it means. That would be an answer he would give. So the idea that a child hasn't got the developmental capacity of an adult in certain areas is perfectly valid. But because we're absolutely flexible, in fact, flexible is not really the right word. Perhaps there's another word which I can't access right now, because we're working with the student. We're working with the student. We're not in that, and that means we're not working on the language. I'm not forcing you to say something in the present perfect. I'm working with you on what you can do. Do you want to? Can you do something? Do you want to hold a red rod and say, I've got a red rod? If you do, that's fantastic. I'm not going to tell you it's fantastic, but it'll be great, and I'll be happy, and so will you.
Is that empathy in the classroom?
It's even more than that, I think. I think it's beyond empathy. I'm not known as a very empathetic person, but I think it goes somewhere else. I'm not sure that there are the words to describe exactly what's going on. But your observations of what students do, whether they're 7 or 70, lead you to guide them in a certain direction, which might simply mean pushing another red rod towards them, or it might mean taking a red rod away and putting it somewhere else. So they have to say something. They have to say, give it me back. You see where I'm going? These are micro actions in a way, but they all build up into a fantastic tapestry of stuff which causes Silent Way to work, whatever age you are. Now, I once had an argument with an academic, a colleague of mine, who said the qualities of a good language teacher of adults don't necessarily apply to the qualities of a good language teacher for young learners. And I said that's not nonsense. Actually, that wasn't the word I used. I used the word beginning with B. But I said, if you're a sensitive teacher, you can deal with 7-year-olds or 70-year-olds, doesn't matter, and you'll react to them. And this was my Silent Way speaking. And I realized long later that this came from my understandings of Silent Way.
And as you're speaking, one of the things that strikes me is, another problem with course books. It's a cliche, is the fact that the course book and the internal syllabus, the internal language system just don't match. And we have such poor understanding of acquisition order anyway. But it does strike me that it might be the case that another benefit of the Silent Way is that this understanding that the best time for someone to learn something is at the point of need. Yep. That the student at that handover moment, and I think, is it fair to say that in Silent Way that the metaphor of handing over is that at the point where the instructor, the teacher, has worked with some language that he feels that is appropriate to do, based perhaps on what the students are indicating is what they need to communicate, that in fact at the point where the students start taking rods and trying things out and doing things with one another, that in fact that there is an opportunity there for the student's own internal syllabus, as it were, to express itself as I need to be able to say this and I don't, but it can be co-constructed with the other learners using the rods.
Yes, that's exactly right. The only issue I would have with that is the word handover, because there isn't really a handover. It's a constant. It's a constant process. It's not I at the moment hold the power and I'm now going to give it to you. Okay. It's we're working together. Actually, I'm working with you. So you see it like a sort of almost a downward direction thing, where I'm working with you, the student who's on the same level as me, and you're working on the language. Does that make sense?
No,
it doesn't.
No, for me it makes sense. I was just saying I couldn't necessarily speak for everyone else who's with us, and perhaps.
Yeah. No, I'm hoping someone's going to throw a tomato at me or something in a minute. So we'll find it.
As we're waiting for comments, I don't want to kind of close down that opportunity. Perhaps I should just shut up at this point and see if anyone wants to comment. If not, I'm really intrigued to come back to you on a point you were making about the Cuisenaire rod and how those rods just seem to draw attention in. I don't know if it's coincidence, because I come from a slightly newer generation, but not that far removed from I.H. Hastings and those heady days. I trained in the very early 90s at I.H. London, and I think there was a continuum. And genuinely, the most memorable training input session I was involved in was the third conditional using Cuisenaire rods.
Great.
And the Cuisenaire rods stood in for lexical items, bus. It was all about basically my terrible day, and I left my umbrella, which was about I got wet.
Yes.
Then I got on the bus, and the bus broke down, and all the rest of it. And this was all constructed through Cuisenaire rods, and the language was then elicited back through Cuisenaire rods. Now, as I understand it, that's not really a Silent Way lesson at all. It's just a substitute realia.
Well,
but
let me, sorry to interrupt, Neil. It depends where in the process this occurs, because if you have rod stories are part of Silent Way. However, the inauthentic focusing on, for example, the third condition, as in your example, it would not be. So you can create a rod story in which things happen and language is elicited, which the teacher is in a sense directing, and that's all of that stuff is in my book. By the way, a little plug for my book. So what you saw there was a memorable use of the Cuisenaire rods, focusing on one structure, and it was great, but it wasn't Silent Way. You're right, it wasn't Silent Way.
Gabby has said that if there's still time that she has a question, so if we can hand straight back to Gabby.
Please do.
Yeah, very, very quickly. This is a question for you, Steve, and I don't even know if it's a valid question. It may sound completely nonsensical, but I wonder, I was watching a video yesterday, Rosalind Yang, who is a Silent Way practitioner,
Yep.
and she actually made a comment that made me think, and that's why I wonder how you feel about it. She said that language is for expression, not for communication. Now, when she said that, the reason why she said that was because she believes that the silent way is actually based on the idea that language is for expression, not for communication. And she could see quite a few issues with the communicative approach. Quite a few problems with the communicative approach. So my question really is, I know we have very little time. It's a big question, but I just wonder what your thoughts are on this, and whether you even think that it's a valid question. I mean, is language for expression or for communication? Is it a question that we should be asking before we start thinking about what methodology to use when we teach?
It's certainly a valid question. I have a lot of respect for Rosalind Young. She's a very well experienced and well known silent way practitioner, as you say. I don't think Gatenia would agree with her. I think what Gatenia would say, and indeed what I would say, is that both cases are valid. So Gatenia specifically introduced give and take as the first verbs, not because they express something, but because they communicate something. And his idea was that he wanted communication to occur. He was very, very keen on getting students to use language, as I said in my presentation. But there are certainly moments of reflection in which students express ideas, express thoughts, express preferences, and so on, without necessarily having any kind of comeback in terms of active communicative involvement. So I think the answer to that interesting question, which I couldn't answer in a minute and a half, is first of all both, and secondly, one isn't dependent on the other, and one isn't dependent on the other. Yeah, sorry, it's a bit of a mishmash answer.
No, it's brilliant. I mean, look, I know how difficult this question. It's a big question, first of all. So, and I know how little time we have. So, absolutely happy with your answer, Steve. It's brilliant.
As a final question, Steve, you've mentioned your book. I mean, Rosalind has obviously published on the silent way, how we learn and how we should be taught, as a first edition, a first volume in a two-part that she's working with Messam. What's your book going to offer us? And
my book is not about silent way, and I make that point in several places in the very first chapter. It's about using the rods, and the reason that I've written it, that this book has been in various computers for more than 20 years, but I don't know actually how long, maybe 30 years. And over the years, I've added to it. I've gone back and I've changed it. You know how it is. If you write something, you go back and you go, oh, wait, I don't really believe that anymore. Or there's new research, and so that doesn't count anymore. Got to change that. And so it's been. And now I'm on the final chapter, and I've got a publisher who's interested, and there may even be another one who might be interested. So the book is about you. It's assuming a teacher, as so many that I've met, would like to use the questionnaire rods, but hasn't got a clue where to start. And I've run workshops on using the questionnaire rods, and people come up to me afterwards and they say, well, where do I go from here? Now, what do I do? What I want to say to them is, get a box of rods and go and try stuff. But that doesn't work. It doesn't work. People don't do it. People want more guidance than that, it seems to me. I hesitate to say unfortunately, but there we are. And so this book is designed to fill that gap. It's designed for anybody who has ever thought about using the questionnaire rods for something more than comparatives and you know, the red rod is smaller than the green one and all that stuff. Yeah.
And all things going to plan, is that 2022 or 2023?
No, I'm hoping this year. I mean, I've been busy building this bookcase behind me and all kinds of other stuff, collecting olives in the gardens, and you know, So, but I've got to focus myself and get this thing finished. And it'll be this year. And if it's not, well, no, it will be this year. It will be this year. Yeah.
I think, you know, it was really interesting, some of the responses at the very beginning of the session when I asked that question, you know, do people have Cuisinart roles? I think there's a real appetite amongst certain teachers, and what I very much hope for you and for the book, that even if it starts with a smaller number of people who are, you know, preaching to the converted converts, that, you know, it'll get into staff rooms and interest will grow. And we all wish you massively well for that. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be the panelist. I hope I've been able to do it a little bit of justice to an amazing topic.
You've done a fantastic job, and thank you very much. And also because you jumped in at short notice, so really, I really do appreciate that. And thanks to the attendees as well. But
thank you, Steve, for allowing us to understand so much more about an area that you say, unfortunately, for many people is a silent area of their language teaching, understanding and expertise. And thank you for helping to address that today.
My pleasure.